A flight attendant spills a drink on a black CEO on purpose. 10 minutes later, she's fired on the spot. If you believe black professionals deserve respect, not humiliation, subscribe right now. The low hum of the terminal filled the air as Marcus Ellison approached Gate 17. A polished figure in a charcoal gray suit, he moved with quiet authority. Everything about him spoke of precision. His crisp white shirt, spotless leather briefcase, and the subtle yet deliberate way he adjusted his cufflinks before handing over his boarding pass. To the average onlooker, Marcus looked like a senior executive heading to a conference. But behind the calm expression and firm handshake was a man whose name held weight in boardrooms that never made the headlines. Marcus Ellison wasn't just another passenger in first class. He was the unseen hand behind Orion Holdings, the parent company that silently owned and managed several aviation brands, including the very airline operating Flight RZ-302. He stepped onto the aircraft with practiced ease, his polished shoes clicking softly against the jet bridge floor. Inside the plane, the cabin was still quiet. A few early boarders were settling in, and flight attendants moved with rehearsed grace. Marcus scanned the layout quickly, mentally noting details: the cleanliness of the cabin, the alignment of the magazines in the seat pockets, the posture of the staff. Every detail mattered. This wasn't just a business trip. This was a mission. A series of customer complaints had trickled in over the last 6 months, some buried in long feedback forms, others surfacing in internal reviews. Words like disrespectful, rude, and dismissive kept appearing, particularly in relation to the first-class cabin crew. Marcus had reviewed them all. He didn't believe in micromanaging, but he did believe in accountability. That's why he had chosen this flight under the radar, without a security detail or fanfare. Only his executive assistant knew where he was. To the crew, he was simply Mr. Ellison, first-class passenger in seat 2B. "Welcome aboard, sir," came a voice from his left. Marcus turned slightly to find a tall man with slicked-back brown hair and a carefully curated smile. The name tag read, Greg Simmons. "Thank you," Marcus replied with a polite nod, his tone neutral but firm. Greg gave a tight-lipped smile and gestured toward the seat. "Let us know if you need anything," he said, the words robotic and laced with thinly veiled disinterest. As Marcus settled into his seat, he noticed Greg's smile drop the moment he turned away. The flight attendant's posture shifted, as if the interaction had cost him more effort than it was worth. That subtle change didn't escape Marcus's attention. He had trained himself to read people, expressions, micro-behaviors, body language. It came from years of boardroom negotiations, but also from a deeper instinct. Something about Greg's demeanor struck him as off. Marcus placed his briefcase beneath the seat, slid his tablet from the front pocket, and exhaled quietly. The seat was decent, leather, well-maintained, but still he hesitated. After a moment, he pressed the call button. Greg returned almost immediately, one eyebrow raised. "Something wrong, sir?" he asked, smile intact but eyes sharp. Marcus remained calm. "Just wondering if I could get a seat cover. I'll be reviewing some sensitive documents, and I'd rather not risk any spills." Greg's smile widened slightly, but not in a friendly way. "We don't offer seat covers for that kind of request," he said flatly. "You'll be fine." The tone was unmistakable, dismissive, almost mocking. Marcus gave a small nod. "Understood." He didn't argue. He didn't push. Instead, he leaned back and unlocked his tablet. On screen, a series of briefing documents awaited, merger notes, internal audits, and staff performance summaries. But he wasn't reading them just yet. He was thinking about the response he'd just received. It wasn't that the request was denied. That happened sometimes. It was the way it was denied. There was no effort to find a solution, no courtesy, just a thin veneer of customer service wrapped around barely concealed disdain. 10 minutes into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow. The drink cart began its gentle clatter down the aisle. Greg pushed it with one hand, chatting quietly with a younger attendant trailing behind him. Marcus continued reviewing his documents, eyes scanning the screen while his ears remained tuned to the ambient noise. He could hear bits of conversation from the galley, a chuckle, the clink of ice. Then Greg appeared beside him again, the cart parked just slightly off-center. "Orange juice?" he asked, voice still carrying that practiced tone. Before Marcus could respond, Greg's hand moved with a sudden jerk. The glass tilted, far too quickly, far too carelessly. In an instant, a wave of cold orange liquid splashed across Marcus's lap, soaking his slacks and spattering his tablet screen. The citrusy scent filled the air, sharp and unwelcome. "Oops," Greg said, almost mechanically. There was no gasp, no apology. Just the sound of the cart being steadied and Greg casually reaching for a napkin, one napkin, and handing it to Marcus without looking him in the eye. The entire first-class cabin froze for a second. A few passengers glanced over, pretending not to see. Others simply looked away, suddenly absorbed in magazines or their screens. Marcus stared at the spreading stain on his trousers, then at the wet corners of his documents. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly set down his tablet on the tray table, took the napkin, and wiped the device clean with deliberate care. Greg stood awkwardly for a moment, then muttered, "I'll be back," and moved on, leaving a small trail of tension behind him. Marcus let the silence hang in the air for another beat. Then he reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a slim black phone. On its screen was a single app, secure, encrypted, and known only to high-level executives within Orion Holdings. He tapped it open, revealing several options. He selected one. Observe. The phone vibrated once, then the screen dimmed. Unbeknownst to Greg, Marcus had just triggered a full review of the flight's internal surveillance. Cameras hidden in the cabin walls, intended for safety and internal audits, would now stream directly to an operations team on the ground. Every angle, every interaction, every careless smirk. Marcus leaned back in his seat, the chill of the juice beginning to fade, but the message etched clearly in his mind. This wasn't a clumsy mistake. It was deliberate, calculated. Greg had no idea who Marcus was, but soon he would. Only real ones who stand up against workplace racism will subscribe. Are you with us? 10 minutes after the incident, the cabin of Flight RZ-302 had returned to its artificial calm. The soft hum of engines, the occasional ding of the call button, and the rustling of snack wrappers filled the space. Greg walked down the aisle with the ease of someone who believed he owned the air between the seats. His smirk had returned. He glanced back toward seat 2B, where Marcus Ellison now sat dry but unreadable, his expression locked behind a veil of calm that only a seasoned leader could maintain. High above the clouds, inside the cockpit, Captain Renner received a cryptic message through his secure communications console. He blinked and leaned closer to the screen. Flight under silent audit. Issue reported in first class. Crew performance under review. Maintain current course. Do not alert staff. The captain read it twice, then sat back in his chair, a slow exhale escaping through his nose. In all his years of flying for Altera Air, under the Orion Aviation umbrella, he had never seen a transmission like this. It didn't come from standard operations. The tag attached was internal executive level. That meant someone powerful was watching. Very powerful. In the cabin, Greg nudged Kelvin, a junior attendant who had just started his third month on long-haul rotations. "That guy in 2B thinks he's special," Greg whispered with a grin, nodding toward Marcus. "Just another suit trying too hard. Probably a finance guy. The type that complains if the lemon wedge is crooked." Kelvin gave a polite chuckle but didn't respond. Something about Greg's tone made him uncomfortable. He looked ahead at Marcus, who sat quietly with his tablet, as if none of it had touched him. But something in Marcus's silence, the precision of his movements, and the cold efficiency with which he had changed pants and resumed his work, it unnerved Kelvin. What Kelvin couldn't know was that Marcus's command to observe had triggered a real-time audit. Back at Orion Aviation's operations headquarters, a task force of analysts was now reviewing live surveillance pulled from the aircraft's internal security system. Multiple angles showed what had happened in startling detail. Greg's body posture as he leaned in with the drink cart, the way he jerked the glass with just enough force to spill it in a direct stream onto Marcus's lap, and, most damning of all, the deadpan look that followed. There was no shock, no apology, no attempt to help. A pattern had emerged, cross-referenced against past incident reports filed by other passengers, most of which had been brushed off due to lack of evidence. But this time, the target wasn't just a customer. It was the company's highest-ranking executive, flying undercover. And now, Marcus had everything he needed. He didn't rush. Instead, he focused on the feeling of wet fabric no longer clinging to his skin and the sting of citrus fading from the air. His mind moved like a chessboard, calculating future consequences with every breath. As he reviewed the message on his secure device, confirmed. Grounds for immediate termination. Would you like to handle personally or authorize on arrival? He tapped the screen with 2 fingers. The response was immediate and decisive. Authorize. Notify gate crew. Escort upon landing. The plane had another 90 minutes before descent, and Marcus used the time as if nothing had happened. He reviewed quarterly performance data on his tablet, checked a few unread messages from his assistant, and sipped quietly on a new glass of water, this one delivered by Kelvin with trembling hands and wide, apologetic eyes. Marcus gave a polite nod. "Thank you," he said calmly. Kelvin lingered. "Sir, if anything wasn't right, You were fine," Marcus cut in gently, sparing the young man from having to over-explain. Kelvin nodded and stepped away, trying to ignore the knot growing in his chest. The descent began smoothly. The seatbelt sign chimed. Passengers adjusted trays and recliners as window views shifted to cloud-broken glimpses of a golden skyline. Greg, still oblivious, moved through final checks. "Almost there," he said cheerfully to a passenger in 3D. "One more smooth landing, right?" In the cockpit, Captain Renner received a second message. "Ground team in position. Gate C-14. Mr. Simmons to be removed upon arrival. Discretion requested." He glanced into the mirror mounted above the control panel, angled toward the cabin door. He could just barely see Marcus's reflection through the galley. That sealed it. Touchdown was clean. The aircraft rolled to a smooth halt at Gate C-14, and the usual ping of disembarkation filled the cabin. But something was different. 2 figures stood just outside the jet bridge, a uniformed security officer with a comm earpiece and a senior ground manager wearing a dark vest marked Operations Clearance. "Cabin crew, disarm doors and cross-check," Renner announced, his voice neutral. Greg leaned toward Kelvin, still grinning. "Not a bad shift, huh? Let's hope we get a short layover." Kelvin nodded awkwardly. Just then, the intercom clicked on again, but this time it was not the pilot's voice. It was the gate manager, patched through directly. "Mr. Greg Simmons, please report to the front of the aircraft immediately." The moment froze. The smile drained from Greg's face. His eyes darted toward Marcus in 2B, who had just stood up, adjusted his suit jacket, and reached for his briefcase. Did they just say my name?" Greg whispered, half laughing, half confused. Passengers turned. No one spoke. The quiet that followed was heavy and deliberate. Kelvin took a step back as Greg moved slowly toward the front galley, trying to make sense of what was happening. At the cabin door, the ground manager stepped inside. "Mr. Simmons?" he asked calmly. "Yeah?" Greg's voice cracked slightly. "Please come with us." "For what?" Greg's tone sharpened, defensive now. "This way, please." Greg hesitated, but when the security officer placed a firm hand on his arm, the decision was made for him. He was led out the front, down the jet bridge, past the silent glares of passengers, some confused, others clearly enjoying the fall from grace. Greg didn't struggle, but the look in his eyes shifted from confidence to confusion, then dread. Marcus exited last, walking with the steady posture of someone who hadn't been rattled in decades. He passed Kelvin, paused briefly, then leaned in. "Sometimes silence is the best witness," Marcus said quietly, then continued toward the door. Kelvin stood frozen, the words echoing in his mind. Outside, on the tarmac, a black executive sedan idled quietly. As Marcus approached, the driver stepped out and opened the door. He entered without a word, the tinted windows closing behind him as the vehicle pulled away into the late afternoon light. Captain Renner stood just outside the cockpit, watching it all unfold through the side window. He nodded slowly in understanding. The flight was over, but the message had only begun to echo. Professionalism isn't just expected, it's inspected. And those who fail to uphold it, especially through arrogance or bias, eventually meet the reckoning they never saw coming. He didn't raise his voice, he raised the consequences. If that felt right, hit subscribe and stay with the truth. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to highlight the consequences of intentional mistreatment and the importance of fairness and accountability. Its purpose is to encourage discussions about respect, justice, and the need to stand up against discrimination in any form.